Shoulder dystocia. Let's talk about it. Hi, I'm Dr. Toya, board certified OBGYN, and two things. This is not about the tragedy that happened in Atlanta. I don't want to speculate. This is about how shoulder dystocia is managed, because what I've realized, because of that tragedy, many people, including healthcare workers, don't actually know how they are managed and all the things we can do to manage it. So I wanted to provide that education. The second thing is the biggest trigger warning for anyone who is going to watch this video. If you are thinking about becoming pregnant or are pregnant, I do not recommend that you watch this. Just trigger warning. What is a shoulder dystocia? When the baby is coming out during delivery, the head comes out and the shoulders get stuck. Usually we call it the anterior shoulder, but it's really whichever one is facing the ceiling and can get stuck under the pubic bone. This is an obstetrical emergency because the baby does not get oxygen during this time. The umbilical cord is compressed, the baby can't breathe properly, so there could be neurological damage from lack of oxygen, as well as physical damage, so nerve damage in these nerves right here, or bodily damage. In very rare cases, it can cause the baby to pass away. So unfortunately, there is no good predictor of this happening. There are some risk factors, some very big risk factors, some risk factors that are not so great, but there's no way for us to know for sure if it's going to happen. Similarly, during labor, there are some ways we can tell if this is going to happen, and some ways that really are just not good. The evidence shows that there is no great way to predict if this is going to happen. So the most distinctive sign that this is going to happen is something called the turtle sign, where the head is coming out and it retracts in like a turtle. And that's how we know to raise the alarm this is happening. But at that point, there's nothing that can be done to prevent it. You only have to treat it. So there's several different ways that we can relieve a shoulder dystocia. Like I mentioned, this is an emergency. This usually happens within a couple minutes. The most common ways that the shoulder dystocia is relieved is by the first two maneuvers, the McRoberts and suprapubic pressure. So McRoberts is when you put the head of the bed all the way down so mom is completely flat and flex the legs all the way back. And also usually at the same time, there's somebody pushing just above this pubic bone. That's the suprapubic pressure. So oftentimes those two things are done together, and thankfully that's usually all we need to get baby out. Sometimes that does not work and we have to do more invasive maneuvers. These maneuvers seek to get that shoulder that's impacted from behind the pubic bone so baby can deliver. So you can either get the posterior arm out, the arm that's facing the floor. You can do two rotational maneuvers, and there's a little bit of a newer maneuver called the shrug, where you pull a little bit on the shoulder that's posterior and then rotate the baby to get baby out. There's also the Gaskin maneuver, which is getting on hands and knees, pioneered by a midwife whose name was Gaskin. And if you're not you don't have an epidural, this may come earlier, and this is not that you have to do these things in order. We usually do the thing that we think is going to work the fastest to get baby out. So if these things are not working, the next step is to try again. The next step is to call for help and have somebody else try. And you keep doing that to get baby out. And usually with a combination of those maneuvers, baby comes out. So this is my second trigger warning. The maneuvers I'm going to go over can be very traumatic. So if you want to scroll, now is your time. So there are chances where those maneuvers don't work and we have to get the baby out. So that's when you come into more aggressive maneuvers, like intentionally breaking the baby's collarbone so that the diameter of the shoulders decreases and the shoulder can come out. Or you can break the pubic bone of the patient. It's as bad as that sounds. And then the Zalvanelli maneuver, which is when the baby is replaced into the belly and a C-section is performed. Now, these are called last-ditch efforts or heroic maneuvers, but the way that I encourage people to think about it is that the heroism is usually for mom, because at that point, mom is the only one that is left to survive. If baby and the patient do survive, there will be severe injury to both. A C-section, which is part of that Zalvanelli maneuver, is not a routine part of the way that we relieve a shoulder dystocia. It is the last resort. And just to explain that putting the baby back in the belly may sound simple, but it is really difficult because you're working against contractions. The baby is already head out. They're tight and impacted in that pelvis. So to physically do it is difficult, and to do it without any damage to the baby is almost impossible. And finally, if none of this works, if you're not able to put the baby back in, decapitation may be necessary to get the baby out. We have to get the baby out, because the longer this entire process goes, the more and more the patient's life is in danger. So if you cannot get the baby back in to then do the C-section, you can intentionally decapitate. And I've never had to do this myself, but it had happened at the program where I trained in residency. So I know for a fact it's something that can be done, and it is only because it was very, very necessary. So, thankfully, shoulder dystocias that are that severe are very rare, as I mentioned before. The first two maneuvers usually get the baby out, and this is usually in the tune of minutes. My longest was 4 minutes, and it felt like an eternity. Let me know if you have any questions about any of this.